Okay, we're going to jump right back into our next section of presentations. So up first is Julie Winchester presenting MorphoSource 3D Data Repository, investing in IIIF 4 to create interoperable 3D on the web.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. In the interest of hello again. In the interest of full transparency, I did not know that I was going to be giving this talk until about 10 p.m. last night, after a drink or two. So we'll see how this goes, but yeah. So when I'm not doing IIIF things, I am at Duke University in the Department of Evolutionary Anthropology, and I work with MorphoSource, a 3D data repository. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what MorphoSource is and how MorphoSource uses IIIF. And don't let the skull or the fact that I'm in an evolutionary anthropology department fool you. It is also a cultural heritage resource repository. It's not just biology. Though if you looked at the abstract for this talk and you were hoping to hear me talk about something from the Swedish National Archives, you can take a 15-minute break. Or a nap. Take a micro nap. All right, what is MorphoSource? This is my elevator pitch, one sentence. MorphoSource, which is at morphosource.org, is a public-facing digital repository service where global researchers, museum curators, educators, and the general public can find, download, and upload 3D, but also 2D and AV media representing objects of academic or scholarly interest. So mostly physical objects, a lot of scans or images of physical objects, but also some born digital creations. To get into that a little bit more, we're a digital repository. One of our core missions is democratizing access to data. So data are always free to access. No user is ever charged to access data. And in fact, for most users, for users with 100 gigabytes or less of data to contribute, we subsidize contribution. For users with under a terabyte, in some cases, we subsidize contribution. And above that, we work with groups who are able to find grant funding for data deposit and things like that. We are 3D specialized, because doing 3D stuff often takes some specialization, but we do support 2D and AV. And the data, we don't own anything, Duke doesn't own anything. The data are all contributed and managed by a global community of user contributors. The main user communities that tend to use MorphoSource, so scholars, researchers, museums and imaging facilities. We do have a particular strength in sort of natural history collections, but there is also other sort of non-natural history cultural heritage material, and the general public. And I should really have a bullet point in there for educators, because we have a lot of K through 12 educators that use the site as well. The stuff you can do on MorphoSource, you can find data. You can find 3D scans of things. When you find those, you can download the 3D scans, or you can use sort of our shiny interactive web viewer to work with them right there on the web. You can contribute and publish data. And actually for staff from museums, academic departments, institutions, imaging facilities, you can actually manage scans on MorphoSource, even if those scans are uploaded by third-party researchers. If you are a museum loaning physical objects to third-party researchers, and they scan those, you can use MorphoSource as a tracking and management platform for that. We have been around for about 12 years. So we started in 2013, and right now we have over 222,000 media files on the site, representing over 78,000 physical objects, which is, I put cultural heritage objects, which we have over 1,000 cultural heritage objects out of 78,000. As I said, we started as a natural history only repository. We rebuilt the whole site in like 2017 to also be able to support cultural heritage, non-biological cultural heritage objects. And we are continually doing more and more things to try and support that better. So if you're interested in putting 3D data up, and you're like, well, but I want to, describe it in this way, we love to hear that, because that gives us a good way to grow. But those objects come from over 1,600 organizations, which museum collections, university departments, institutions, and over 230 of those museum or collection teams are actually actively managing data on the site. And the people accessing data, we have over 25,000 registered users, of which almost 10% of those have actually contributed data. The kind of data that people can put on MorphoSource, 3D models, image stacks, so image stacks created by CT scanners, photogrammetry image stacks, actually sort of like slide sections from microscopes, 2D images, and video. We also support a lot of different ways of creating images. We have particular strengths in like X-ray CT, micro CT, but also photogrammetry, structured light scanning, photography, and also this whole long list. Things that distinguish MorphoSource from a resource like Sketchfab or some other sort of academic data repositories is that we have a real focus on, sometimes when you are producing 3D assets, you end up with a very complex imaging and processing workflow. So you're using a lot of different software, maybe to initially scan the thing and then to process it. We have a data model where you can sort of track that imaging and processing workflow. We only accept open, non-proprietary file formats, and we have a real emphasis on the FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. We use standard vocabularies wherever possible. And for physical objects that come from museum collections, we have a museum-mediated flow of data. So where the object records get linked to a museum collection or institution record. And I mentioned this before, that MorphoSource users who are members of, say, a museum collection can actually track their media on the site, track media that represents their objects on the site, even when they're uploaded by third parties. So imaging facilities can also do that. And last thing I think before I talk about IIIF, just to point out, MorphoSource is very actively used. These are our quarterly downloads and views over the last quarters. And we're very actively cited in scholarly publications. That superlative, the most frequently cited, this is from like a natural history conference that I went to, so that's a very natural history kind of statement. But the numbers, regardless, we've been able to track over 2,700 scholarly publications linked to data sets in the site. Stuff that is on the site, you've been seeing this image of this ceramic object. We have art and cultural heritage objects, and we have a lot of cool biological specimens. We have insects. This is a photogrammetry scan of an insect. We have scans of flowers. We have scans of invertebrate fossils, like this crinoid, and even like protozoa. So there's all kinds of stuff on there. But I think more to the point, what we're here for, we have invested in IIIF. So MorphoSource as a web application is built on top of Hyrax, which meant that we got IIIF support out of the box for IIIF 2/3, but then we were like, can we do 3D with it? And the answer was maybe. And so we've really been sort of trying we really want to use IIIF for 3D, which is how I got involved with this to start with. So yeah, we want to mobilize our data according to FAIR principles. 3D media are really hard to work with. The files tend to be really large. They tend to require large or sometimes proprietary file formats, so they aren't web-friendly. And so a core part of the repository is actually creating and displaying interactive web-sized preview assets for 3D models or CT scan, like CT image stacks as well. But with over 220,000 media, we can't go through and make each of the web previews by hand. So automatic generation is essential. And if I had 45 minutes, I would tell you 15 minutes about how we make those, but I'm just going to kind of skip over it. But this is the basic process. And fortunately for you all, I don't think I have to explain the utility and value of generating a IIIF presentation resource for something. But so if we have a user, like this astronaut emoji, that's a user here, who goes and uploads a 3D model to MorphoSource, behind the scenes, we are going to characterize as much file metadata from that. And we actually have lots of different scripts to create web-sized. We take like a 3 gigabyte 3D model, and we're going to shrink it down to like a 5 megabyte 3D model, which is not a 100%. Sometimes there are issues, as you might expect. But it's actually pretty successful. And once we have that preview, for every preview on the site, for all 2D images, all videos, all 3D models, and CT stacks, we actually generate a IIIF presentation resource for all of those. So every media on the site is IIIF backed, and we use that IIIF manifest to power our viewer on our pages, to power embeds on arbitrary third-party pages through Universal Viewer, and through connecting to downstream IIIF tools. So to talk more about that and IIIF 4 in specific, We actually, like I said, we're all in on IIIF 4. We added beta support on our production site for IIIF 4 like 3 weeks ago, which means that the default IIIF manifests for all content on the site are actually all Prezi 4 at this point, and we know it's a draft. We're going to keep updating it as the spec evolves. And actually, we are able to view IIIF 4 content. We use Universal Viewer with our own 3D viewer called IIIF R3F, which we sort of use as an extension within Universal Viewer. And I'm going to talk about that viewer a little bit more. Yeah, so this is our 3D viewer, IIIF R3F. And this little model that I'm going to use, it's a mandible for a whale. I think you actually saw it in Ronald's slide of the mandible combined with the cranium. Some things that the viewer has. So it enables, compared to some 3D viewers that are principally for display, it enables some degree of research use through measurements and annotations. So for one thing, it lets you use both a perspective camera and an orthographic camera. So by orthographic camera, I mean a camera that has no sense of perspective. Things that are closer to you are just as large as things that are far away, which for some research use cases, that's really important for being able to see relative size and shape of things. We have multiple ways to take length and angle measurements off of things. So on your left, that's like a point of a model surface to another point. You have to sort of pick 2 points on the surface, and it'll give you the distance between them. But on your right, we also have what we call screen ruler measurements, which it's like you put a ruler on your screen, which is sometimes a lot easier. If I just want to know how far across something is, maybe there's not good points on the surface to pick, it's easier to just use a ruler. You can also see the overall dimensions from the bounding box. We have rotation, lighting controls, and again, a thing we added just a couple weeks ago that is also powered by IIIF 4 is users who have media on MorphoSource can also save and persist comment label annotations that automatically show up on the media page. So you can see a little preview of a fossil there that has sort of those label annotations. It's very beta. The way that people do it is they go to their media edit page and then they go to this beta preview tab, and it allows them to set these things. The annotations have titles, descriptions. Each annotation has a specific camera view. So if you I want to, if I have a sphere and I want to annotate something here, but I want people to look at it from here, or maybe I want them to look at it from here, you can specify that. You have these annotation-specific camera views. And users, sort of like Sketchfab, have this ability to step between annotations smoothly for like a nice narrative experience. So this is just an example of sort of stepping annotation through annotation. Sort of spins around, gives you that whole thing. And I should say we built this with Ed Silverton. So I want to shout out Ed. We've had 2 iterations of viewers that we've worked with Ed to build. He's phenomenal. And yeah, so all of these annotations are backed with IIIF 4. Like I said, for all media, we have a presentation manifest powering them. And now those presentation manifests are actually storing the annotations, including the camera views, and also if you set the initial rotation of the model, which we didn't put any JSON in the plenary, but here's your JSON if you were waiting for JSON. I know you can't, I know it's a bit small, but that was the whole manifest, just to point out that's how we reference the 3D model. We reference the comment annotations right there. And just a couple more things. We built a tool actually to help people export annotations from Sketchfab. So it's at this URL. I've mentioned it in the 3D channel on the IIIF Slack as well if you're interested. It basically makes use of the Sketchfab Viewer API. You give it a Sketchfab URL, it will give you Sketchfab's annotation JSON. It also converts it to our internal annotation format. It's weird, we're sort of juggling an internal annotation format, but also storing everything in IIIF 4 and powering it all with IIIF 4. And we're going to update this soon to just export directly to IIIF 4 as well. And yeah, so our viewer, this IIIF plus universal viewer, viewer in production, you can actually use this to display your own IIIF manifest. So if you make some experimental 3D IIIF manifests, you can use this as sort of an experimental sandbox. And like I said, this is our production viewer. This viewer is not going to go away. We're going to update it as the spec updates. You basically take that base URL, add that little parameter, and then put the URL to your manifest in there, so that the URL at the bottom is loading the manifest there of the two astronauts scaled different sizes. So we hope that that'll be helpful for people as they start to experiment with IIIF 3D, just to have some resources with which to work. So, and that's what I've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Julie filled in last minute for us because we had folks coming from the Swedish National Archives who, because of the last minute issue, were not able to attend. However, if you are dying to see that presentation, we are planning to have them at the next IIIF community call, so you can dial into that and see the presentation then. Okay, up next is Ursula Loosli from the University of Bern. Presenting how the University Library of Bern supports researchers with an easy-to-use institutional IIIF software as a service.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm happy to be here and to talk about our institutional offer. We are from Bern University Library, and we offer this service to the researchers, to different research projects at the University of Bern. And I thought about this agenda, starting with the start of our service, classical way, then talking to you about what exactly we offer and how we do that, under which conditions. Finally, giving you an overview of our system and of some user-friendly features to finish with where are we now. So the initial request came in 2020 from a research project at Bern University that already knew about IIIF. They had their own IIIF server located in their office, and they thought about, well, it would be better if the library could offer a IIIF server that is maintained centrally over the long term. So they reached out to us, and of course we agreed to this because we expected a similar demand from other research projects at our university. And then we started with a pilot setup for 2 years. For the use case of digital scholarly editions, who show images besides transcripted texts, like you see on the screen. And this setup was done by the library's IT service, together with the Digital Humanities Chair at the University of Bern and this research project who did the initial request. So then after this successful pilot setup, we decided to open up the service for other research projects that are interested to use that. And since then, we are offering an image API and presentation API, both in versions 2.1 and 3.0, a self-upload solution for images and metadata, as well as a web interface for the project-specific administration. And all that is centrally maintained by the library. Just to mention, we do not offer presentation websites and viewers for the research projects. They build that by their own. We just offer the images over the APIs. And for the roles and support, we have on one side the IT services that offer the application management, software development, and the second level support. And on the other side, we from the data stewards team, we do the consulting and fourth level support, as well as the coordination with the IT services and other units at university. So that's like the setup, but of course to have a service that works for multiple projects over a long time, we also needed to define service conditions under which the projects can use our offer. You see here some examples, and I think the most important part here is that the research project's leaders, as well as the institute's leading directors, have to sign a contract with the library so that we can make sure that they, for example, have a plan to maintain their websites and viewer over the long time. And yeah, it would not make sense to have the images on our servers at the library without the presentation platforms. So that's like an overview of these conditions. Now I would already go to the system overview. this thin black box is like the application that we developed in Bern, and around that you see on the left side an image storage on which we store images, of course. On the right side we have a database in which we store everything else, I could say, like information about collections, sequences, about the uploads, about the images, and also about administrative tasks. And then on the left side you also have the so-called delivery storage. This is the only storage that the users of the service have directly access to. So they can deposit the images before the upload tasks are run. That's how they start to do that. Then the users of the service, here they are called the project admins, they can on one side deposit the images on the delivery storage, and on the other side they can use the application to run the management of their collections, properties, and also to start an import task. So you will see that on another slide later. They can just press some buttons and then the upload tasks are done. Yes, this automated asynchronous task proceeding system takes the images out of the delivery storage, validates them, and then generates it in different sizes on the image storage. And every other information about the images, etc., is stored directly in the database on the right side. And between that we use ORM that forms an interface between our application itself and the database to make the exchange of information easier. And finally, of course, as soon as a task is proceeded, the users get a feedback per email about the task, whether it was successful or not. If not, it contains some error messages so they know what they've done and how it is. Yes, what else do we have? We also use this application, like me and the IT as sysadmins, because we can manage the whole setup of users and research projects. That means I can define which user has access to which project's data. And of course we also could start upload processes, but we let the users do that by themselves. And all these administrative tasks are also stored in the database finally. What else did I want to mention? Yes, the users, this project admins on the left side, can only access this admin environment when they are logged in. And for that, we are working with a Switch EduID. This is a common authentication tool used at Swiss universities. And finally, to build the output for the image API and presentation APIs, images are taken out of the image storage and everything else directly from the database. Yes, so this is a really short and broad overview of our system. And now I would like to highlight some of our user-friendly features. One of them, the first, is that we have a really easy to use GUI to do the uploads of images and metadata and the management. I will show the details on the next slides. Another important aspect is that our concept is multi-tenant. That's really important because we offer it centrally from the library, but it has to be used by different research projects, and we have to make sure that they cannot touch each other's data. So that's really an important point for us. Then what was a specific request from the research projects is that they wanted to access the images not only with the GUIDs, but also with the original file names. So you see it in the example, we just offer it in both ways. If they want, they can access the images with a so-called project slug. This is this Haller example here, and this in combination with the original file name to access the images. Yes, now this is this admin interface. It looks like this as soon as you are logged in. And to show you how easily you can add images, we just start with an example. In the project view, users can define a structure of collections and sequences and images, and here we do have a demo notebook sequence with 4 images, and I would like to add a 5th one. To do that, I can just open a new task. 4 images for my demo project. On the next part, I have to define in the first field which data I want to import, and in the second field to which sequence. And you remember this delivery storage to which the users do have direct access. So before, we just copy a folder with a specific structure on this delivery storage. This has to be packed with Baggage. As soon as this is done, I can just choose my folder with a drop-down, choosing the sequence with a drop-down, and then the image is added. So it's really easy for users to work with it. And finally, we also offer a CSV export of all the image details, just to make it as easy as possible for our users, that they have like one file with all information about image need. Yes, we do have a similar easy process method to add metadata. To make it short, you can add information manually by really navigating in the project structure to a specific sequence, then choosing from a drop-down property, filling out a field. But of course, this would be a lot of work, so we also offer a CSV import, similar to the one of the images. You just define that you want to upload metadata and add images. You upload a CSV file, and how that has to be structured is explained in a manual. So this is just an example. It's really a step-by-step introduction how they have to build these CSV files, and then they can just add the information. And also here we have buttons to access the presentation APIs to make it as easy as possible for our users. Yes, now in conclusion, I would say that we have successfully realized an institutional IIIF software as a service. It is quite good, accepted, and people are really happy with it. We do have 9 research projects that work with our service. Yes, it may seem that it's a small number, only 9 research projects, but they have around 270,000 images on our server, and they use it in parallel, so I think it's quite a good number. Then we could also say it is, compared to other things that we hear here, it may seem a basic offer, only this image and presentation APIs, no viewer, no presentation website, but it is a sustainable offer, and finally it's exactly what our researchers wanted us to do. So I think that's quite good. Then we do also have a host model that works for research projects with limited funding. This was quite important to make also sure that we can offer the storage for those images after a project may not be funded anymore. So I think that's a really important part. Then finally, I would just like to highlight one of the lessons learned from the consulting situations. Communication is really important when offering such a service, because it is a lot of translation work between the nice ideas a project may have because they have seen somewhere something really fancy, and at the end the possibilities to how to do it or whether to do it with the service. So it's really a lot of communication needed to make sure that it works for both sides. And finally, for an outview, we think about offering pre-generated thumbnail images additionally to the setup until now, because we do have projects with, that work with the raster overview pages, and they would prefer to have a really, really fast loading of these preview images. So that's a thing we are discussing actually to do in the next year maybe. And the other thing that we really plan to do is to generalize and to open the source code. And that's it from my side. Thank you for the attention.
Okay, thank you, Ursula. Up next, we have open manifests enabling legal interoperability and reuse. Is that
Last minute change.
Last minute change, okay.
About a clarifying.
Yeah, and to present that is Tom Cramer and Rochelle Lundy.
And then Simeon.
Oh, and Simeon too. Do you want a microphone, Simeon? Perfect.
Thank you, Caitlin. Hello, for those of you I don't know, my name is Tom Cramer. I'm the Associate University Librarian at Stanford University. Joining me today are Rochelle Lundy, the Director of Scholarly Communications at Stanford University, and Simeon Warner, the Associate University Librarian at Cornell University. And today we want to talk about something that has received some attention within the IIIF community, but not, we think, enough attention, and is in fact an issue more broadly for libraries, archives, museums, research, education, and the cultural heritage sector, and that is the legal interoperability of our metadata in general, and for IIIF for manifests. You will see a distinct theme of hedgehogs, which we were not with Julie last night, but we did have beer and we were playing with ChatGPT and DALL-E. So let us know at the end how much you enjoyed these mascots and if you're pro skunk or pro hedgehog. We will be today enact in 3 parts. So the first will be scene setting from myself. Rochelle will talk about the legal facet, and Simeon will talk about the technical facet, and we will close with an agenda for action and a proposal for some next steps. The hypothesis that we present today in general that underlies this work and this advocacy is that open metadata should be the global norm for research, education, and cultural heritage. For definitions, in this case, open means free to access, to use, and to reuse, and metadata is data about data, or the primary resources of scholarship, the thing that we're representing via IIIF. And that thing could be articles, books, software, data sets, art, architecture, museum objects, or more. We've already seen a couple of references to FAIR, or the importance in terms of open data, of having things be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. One of the key points there is to be interoperable and reusable, things must be legal to cite, to view, and to use. Now, coming from cultural heritage sector, not everything is open. There can be valid ethical, privacy, security, or contractual consideration that limit what you can present and to whom. But at the same time, we believe that metadata, as the data about those objects, can and should be open as the norm. Without metadata, it is very difficult to aggregate things, it is very difficult to discover things, citation is a bit peculiar to think about, discovery, analytics, mashups, and more. All of these are enabled by metadata and metadata presented on the web. And through open metadata, we can provide equitable access, we can reward conscientious users, and we can enable delivery of service and innovation of new services. You might think that metadata is naturally open, and you might be right. But what we are seeing is a growing tension between the opens, in terms of the open access, education, science, and data movements, with commercial interests who are seeking to privatize metadata for monetary gain. And there are numerous examples from numerous domains that we're all familiar with, in terms of research, education, and cultural heritage, where we're finding metadata is less open than one might assume that it is, and is presenting barriers and friction for innovation and service delivery. Just a bigger question might actually be, is metadata actually open? Is it copyrightable? Rochelle will talk about that in a little bit. And the questions and concerns about how open metadata is actually introduce still further ambiguity. So IIIF as a standard, as set of standard, was created for the explicit purpose of enabling interoperability and reuse. And the licensing of the resources, the things themselves, has been thoroughly addressed from version 1.0 of the specifications. The manifests, though, and Simeon will talk about this in more detail, have largely been overlooked. There has been some attention in the specifications, there's been much less attention in the community itself. And this is very, very akin to the early development of the web, where resources were presented, but were they open? They were available, they were accessible, but how reusable were they? And one might think that simply by publishing a manifest, you're implicitly granting permission to use and reuse your objects. but we can do better than that. So the conclusion number one, you will see two more, is the IIIF community needs to recognize the importance of open metadata as a community norm, and we need to take steps to explicitly declare manifests and metadata in general as open. I turn it over to Rochelle.
All right, so with, is this on?
Unmute.
Yeah. Unmute.
Slider across it.
This one? Better? All right, thank you. So with that goal of making metadata generally and IIIF manifests in particular explicitly open, we wanted to review some of the law and information policy considerations that might impact our ability to do so. And these are especially pressing considerations for knowledge organizations. It is a core part of our mission to share information, to share our resources, and to make them as discoverable to our users as possible and as accessible to our users as possible. And metadata powers our ability to do so. We have a long tradition across knowledge organizations of informally sharing metadata, enriching it and exchanging it in order to improve it. But as knowledge organizations, we also tend to have a heightened awareness of some of the considerations that may impact or restrict our ability to do that. And to our credit, we tend to be very responsible users of other people's information. And so opening metadata requires finding a balance between these two different goals. And the main consideration when it comes to thinking about potential restrictions on our ability to share metadata that comes to most people's minds is copyright. Copyright does not exist in one universal form. It is implemented differently in every jurisdiction that has some form of copyright protection around the world. However, there do tend to be a number of general principles that anchor copyright law across jurisdictions. So I'll be speaking about those general principles first, and then giving some insight into where there might be specific international considerations that we need to keep in mind. So in general, copyright is not unlimited in scope when it comes to protecting content. There are certain forms of content that are excluded from copyright protection in most jurisdictions. And the main limitation is that copyright is limited to protecting original expressions. So that means that things like facts, statistics, ideas, workflows, or processes do not fall within the scope of copyright. Taking some of these uncopyrightable elements and making them into an arrangement or a particular selection may warrant some form of copyright protection, but only to the extent there is originality or creativity in that particular selection or arrangement. And what that means when we think about copyright in relation to metadata is that for the most part, metadata elements are not copyrightable. So we design metadata to be factual. What makes it useful to us is that it provides an accurate description of the underlying object or resource. And that's what allows it to be useful to us and to power the services that make it discoverable and available. Similarly, when we arrange metadata into a structure, into a metadata record like a manifest, we do that in an established way that allows it to operate effectively with other metadata records and to allow us to use it within our services. There may be certain expressive elements within metadata, so when you see longer forms of expressions such as abstracts, biographies, longer forms of text, there may be some copyrightable elements there, but for the most part, most metadata elements are generally not subject to copyright. As I mentioned earlier, this may be something where there's more nuance across international jurisdictions. So that standard for what constitutes original expression does vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In the United States, we have a fairly high threshold that requires what we refer to as a spark or element of creativity in order to warrant copyright protection. In some jurisdictions, this is lower and requires skill or judgment or labor. These may signify some forms of protectable expression under copyright. In many jurisdictions, there also may be rights that apply regardless of whether something is copyrightable to arrangements or compilations of data. So looking across different jurisdictions will require some more in-depth thinking about what may constitute copyright protection. However, across all of these jurisdictions, perhaps the more pressing issue for us in thinking about whether we can share metadata is contractual restrictions. Contracts, that might be formal license agreements, it might be terms or conditions on use of particular resources or websites. these are able to restrict our ability to use and reuse metadata regardless of whether that metadata is subject to any form of copyright protection. In knowledge organizations, we know that metadata comes from many different places. There's no one way we get metadata. Some of it we're creating ourselves. Some of it we may be purchasing or licensing from vendors. Some of it we may be editing or enriching through proprietary platforms that might impose restrictions on what we can do with it or how we can reuse it. Many metadata records contain combinations of all of these different pathways to the creation of metadata, and that means contracts might be limiting or impacting our ability to reshare it at many different points along its journey. So our second conclusion is that because of all of these nuances that might impact our ability to share, it would be worthwhile to have a IIIF specific legal review about opening our manifests. So that would include a IIIF specific assessment of legal issues, looking at metadata elements in manifests that might be more likely to be subject to copyright or be subject to contractual restrictions, and then creating some IIIF specific guidance about opening manifests that would help more people to review their manifests, work through the list of potential issues, and confidently make that metadata open. We are recommending, along with many others who recommend open data licenses, that metadata be shared in a way that enables the most possible reuse, and that will be with the Creative Commons public domain or universal deed or dedication. That removes the maximum amount of restrictions on metadata reuse. It operates to the greatest extent possible across international jurisdictions, and it also doesn't presume copyright ownership. So with that, I'll turn it over to Simeon to talk about technical issues.
Okay, so when we submitted an abstract for this talk, I thought my part of the presentation was going to be extraordinarily simple, and I was just going to say, here my colleagues have explained to you what we need to do. As a former editor of the specifications up to version 3, I knew there was a mechanism to do it, and I'm going to tell you here's how to do it. As is often the case, it turns out to be a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to start the story one step back from the current specifications. In image and presentation version 2 specifications, those were lacking and unclear. We recognized that when we created version 3. The specific deficiencies there were no ability to add rights information on image API responses, and the license property in the presentation API was extraordinarily loosely defined, and I think anyone coming to the spec would sort of read that and think that the URI in the license property applies to the content resources the same way as the attribution statement applies to the content resources. But no worries, we came up with presentation and image version 3, so we fixed it, right? Well, I would argue at this point, not quite. I think in the image API, we did fix it. There's a very clear definition that the license URI applies to the content of the image. That's what we want, nice, check, done. However, in the presentation API, the rights property replaces the license property, and this defines it as a URI that applies to the content of the resource, such as the JSON of a manifest or the pixels of an image, which I think when we wrote it meant exactly what we intended to say, but for an average reader, that first read resource probably isn't interpreted as the correct resource in the hierarchy of the JSON in which the property appears, and I think that's led to some misunderstanding in use. But great, we have a cookbook on rights statements which could clearly clarify this, and unfortunately I think that's not the case. The current recipe repeats the text from the presentation API, but then it actually talks about rights and required statement in very much the same way, which actually I think has the effect of suggesting that the domain, the thing that both statements apply to, is the same, and that was actually not the intent of the specification. So I thought, well, how are they being used in the wild? Let's go out and have a look. So I looked at the list of collections on the Guides to Finding IIIF Resources page. One sad start was that in looking for a manifest from each of those, I note that we have 80% of collections still using Presentation API 2, and that actually would be 90% if we didn't include Yale's 4 collections that have moved to Presentation API 3. I didn't find examples of image API use of the rights property, and I found very few examples, in fact only Yale, where it was clear that the rights property at the top level of the manifest was intended to apply to this manifest JSON. The content of this manifest is open for reuse, versus the rights statement, which is to be displayed to the user and applies to all of the things the manifest is talking about. So I think we have a little bit of work there to clarify. So, my conclusions. We have reasons to want to be able to express rights URIs on content resources and rights URIs on the JSON and manifest, and to make a clear distinction between the two of them. I think we can retrofit this to the version 3 presentation specification by some work perhaps in the cookbook, and we could probably clarify the text a little in version 4. So, a recap of our 3 condensed conclusions. We need to establish community norms for the sharing of metadata in an open and reusable way. We need to think about the international legal context of IIIF, how it applies to our specific technical needs and how it applies across domains. And we need a little bit of specification and cookbook work on the mechanisms. Thank you.